Am I on? Good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Williamson. I'm Technology Development Manager at Xoserve Limited. I just want to overview what this session is about today. It's about Xoserve replacing its legacy internet channel for data access services to the data that we hold centrally on behalf of the British gas market. And we did this using some SAP technologies, Business Objects Business Intelligence platform, and SAP Data Services software. And as a consequence, we've been able to provide data that's more reliable to our customers and to enhance the customer service. Xoserve is a relatively small company, about 240 employees, and our expertise is in gas transportation, gas wholesale, and gas supply markets in general, and particularly in the idiosyncrasies of the UK or British market and the regulatory regime therein. So for our IT capability, we rely very heavily on our partnerships, and what I'm going to talk to you about today was delivered in partnership with Tata Consultancy Services, and Andrew McFarlane is here, who'll be speaking later from TCS, and it's through our relationship with TCS that they were able to deliver the data inquiry service for us in record time and with excellent customer satisfaction. A bit more about Xoserve as a company. The company was founded on the 1st of May 2005 as part of the restructured gas market in Britain. What happened in 2005 in particular was previously all gas transportation and distribution in Britain, with the exception of some very small areas, had been a monopoly, had been undertaken by one company, National Grid. And in 2005, National Grid sold some of its distribution networks. So we went from a situation where gas transportation was effectively a monopoly in Britain to one in which there were several gas transporters. And that complicated the marketplace, and Xoserve took a range of services that were previously in National Grid into Xoserve to provide one unified point of contact for those services. And those services are, in effect, the transportation transactional services, which are now provided on behalf of 5 British gas transporters. And we're wrapping those up as one consistent service to the gas wholesalers and suppliers, commonly referred to as shippers in the British market. And there's just a statement there about the Xoserve values, which are respect, commitment, and teamwork. And I think that's a big part of our relationship with TCS. Some facts to give you an idea of the scale of Xoserve as an operation. We raise and calculate invoices for transportation charges on behalf of the British gas transporters for passing through to the wholesalers and suppliers. And if you add up the total monetary value of those invoices in any one year, they come to in excess of £4 billion. That £4 billion of charges relates to a portfolio of about 22 million gas supply points, which is the same as saying there are about 22 million customers for gas supply in the British market. They can be individual homes or they can be large industrial customers. We manage centrally the supply point switching service in Britain. In Britain, for example, if you're a domestic customer, somebody can come to your house and say, if you buy your gas now from British Gas or Empower or First Utility, we'll sell it to you for cheaper. And that process of the incoming supplier registering that the customer wants to switch to them and managing the transition from the outgoing supplier is done through systems that Xoserve host and manage centrally on behalf of the industry. That market's growing at a rate of about 100,000 supply points per year currently. And the net result of all that is that if you look at our systems, we're managing around 3 billion in total data items associated with those 22 million supply points, and that represents about 10 years of historical data that we hold on behalf of that market. And we believe that the data inquiry service that I'm about to go on to talk about is therefore the largest data inquiry service for a single European gas market. When we set about to deliver this new data inquiry service, we split the process really up into two. The first thing we had to do was to improve and rationalize the information provision service within Xoserve itself. We have an evolved estate of several different applications, data duplication, data inconsistency between them. We wanted to use the SAP technologies to pull all of that data into one place and make it a single source for all of our business reporting internally within Xoserve. The timeline that we're looking at here in terms of the concurrency of our reporting, the gas market is basically based around a 24-hour cycle, and the gas market day in Britain runs from 6 a.m. one day to 6 a.m. the next day, and really we're always looking to consistently report on the close of the gas market on the previous gas day. We wanted to empower our own business users, which is something that we hadn't been able to do before, to self-serve their own reporting requirements, to generate reports as and when they saw fit to whatever specifications came along at that time, rather than keep coming back to the IT department for that provision. And one of the reasons for that is one of the services, apart from what I'll term the data inquiry service, which I'm going to come on to, which is a self-service internet portal, one of the other services that Xoserve provides to the UK gas market is one-off ad hoc data inquiry services. For example, commonly to the UK regulator, which is Ofgem. Ofgem will come to Xoserve as the repository for a lot of data about the UK gas market, which is otherwise competitive, and that data is spread across many companies. And we have an obligation under our license to try and meet those reporting requirements for Ofgem. And our internal users are able to do that through the information provisioning service. So then, as I said there, with the information provisioning service, one of the business objectives there is that it's about a complex extraction of data from multiple sources and transforming that into a single integrated and consistent representation for our internal users. The next phase of our deployment that we then wanted to go on to was the data inquiry service. So this is where we take all of the data that, as I said, we unified and brought together in the information provision service, and we expose a subset of that to the participants in the British gas market, all of the wholesalers and the transporters and the suppliers, so that they can get a view of the market data at any particular point in time. And we service that through an internet channel. The legacy system that we were replacing was also an internet channel, but one of the problems with it was that we were experiencing significant performance problems, which we wanted to improve upon. We also wanted to make the service more self-serve and user-friendly, so that those external users of it would not need training, because as we're seeing with things like iPads and that type of device, people are more and more wanting to just pick something up and access it without any training. They want it to be intuitive and enable them to use it almost from the get-go, as it were. One of the drivers that we had there is we operate a service help desk for the entire British gas industry, and it's part of our cost base is proportional to the calls that come through that service. So we could see that if we could drive down the number of calls from people using the data inquiry service because it was more intuitive, that would reduce our cost base. We were looking to improve our provision of historical data to the market. Previously, we'd not been able to do that because some of the performance problems in the legacy systems, and one key driver was to be able to go back through the entire 10 years of history for our external customers without degrading the performance to such an extent that it was basically unusable. Security is a big issue for us because we gather data from multiple participants in the gas market. That data is of different types. And then if we want to wrap that up and present it back to the gas market for them to consume, we have to be very, very sensitive about what we show to who. And we have to partition the data both on role, but also on data ownership. Because some of our, well, the vast majority of the people that we're providing the external data service to are in competition with each other. And if we let a security issue mean that we end up exposing the data pertinent to one of those parties to another one, that's quite a significant issue, and we're under a regulatory regime that would penalise us for that mistake. We also wanted to move to a more flexible basis for charging for the service, based on parameters such as the number of hits, how much data people were downloading, whether some of the services that people were accessing were more premium than other services, and previously that hadn't been possible for us. And we were able to move to a situation where we can enable that almost with out-of-the-box capabilities that came with the SAP software because of its auditing and logging, that we didn't have to do anything to implement. And as I've said, a big driver here, naturally, because I mentioned the multiple back-end sources, is data integration. So that meant that we were passing on to our technology partners a significant list of objectives. They were around large data extraction and complex transformation, integrating data from multiple sources. And one of the things that I mentioned there is that some of those sources were offline sources, really, and manual. But we had to try and bring that into a consistent, integrated whole. And some of the metadata management tools in the SAP software enable us to achieve that consistency more easily by being able to, say, tag data items from multiple sources and identify that they should be consistent and expose where they aren't consistent. We needed to have a scalable platform. Smart metering is coming along, which will lead to quite a significant increase in the number of data, in the amount of data that passes through Xoserve systems, and therefore we have to have that scalability going forwards, which wasn't there previously and exposed us to significant risk as the explosion in data increases. We wanted it to be flexible and easily enhanceable, and one of the things that is a characteristic of the new solution that's an enabler there is that most of the views and reports are delivered through configuration in the SAP software. Previously in our legacy bespoke solution, they'd been hand-built, and therefore there was a big overhead in expanding or flexing those. Integration of all the data sources was a big factor. And Xoserve as a company, as I say, it's a regulated company. It's all about providing services efficiently and cost-effectively in a way that we can demonstrate and evidence to the regulator. So now I'll just take you through a quick schematic that shows a bit of an overview of the solution. It starts with all of our legacy data sources, multiple operational systems, which naturally gives us the problems of consistency of data across multiple copies. And what TCS have been able to do for us is to take those multiple data sources and through SAP Data Services extraction, transformation and load, move them into a unified data warehouse. We've got the two groups of users here, our internal users and our external users. The internal users are accessing a much greater volume of data, but conversely we're closer to them so that we can work more closely with them in terms of their familiarity with the user interface. So the internal data source we expose to them essentially using the out-of-the-box business objects front ends. Now, security was a consideration here, so rather than bring the external users in and expose them to exactly the same data source, we actually created a smaller data mart with just the information in that was relevant to the external users. and again used SAP Data Services Extraction, Transformation and Load to populate that. And because those external users aren't so close to us, and therefore the ease of use of the interface was much more critical, we actually used SAP SDK facilities so that we could integrate SAP functionality into our existing internet front end in a way that was more natural for the external users to navigate. So the information provisioning, the internal aspect of that, as I said, the total data warehouse size is about 3 terabytes, and there are about 1,000 extract, transformation and load jobs running daily. And if we look at our user activity, they're supporting them in the analysis of about 7 million data values daily. I mentioned the capability for them to self-service reports, but we also provided them at go live with around 300 canned reports to start off with. And some of the SAP out-of-the-box functionality that we've been able to leverage there are things like the error reporting and load statistics, which our data stewards in IT support are using to monitor what's going on there in that step of the process. And I mentioned before some of the metadata management tools that come with the SAP software that allow us to compare the data that's in different data sources, and therefore when there may be inconsistencies, and identify those inconsistencies. So I'll hand over to my colleague Andrew McFarlane from TCS now, who will take you through an overview of the data inquiry service and a bit about the TCS SAP Practice.
Thanks very much, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. Andy McFarlane, account manager with TCS, and I manage the relationship with Xoserve. So if I can, I'll just maybe give a little bit more information in detail around the kind of successful delivery of the data inquiry solution. As you can see, there was quite a kind of challenging set of kind of non-functional requirements, you know, in terms of giving access to over business objects, access to over 20,000 users, and also having concurrent usage of around 500 users accessing business objects simultaneously. And quite aggressive response times in terms of search criteria could take no longer than 2 seconds to respond. At the time when we were designing and building this solution, there was no real case studies or live examples of where business objects had been exposed to this size of user base. So we had to work closely with our internal technical teams and also with SAP to make sure that we could derive the right sizing and hardware requirements and the memory and CPU usage, etc., to allow us to offer this scaled solution to the external marketplace. You can imagine, I guess, in the UK gas industry, it's very tightly regulated and data controls are paramount. So security played a very high part in the solution that we had to build. In terms of the regulations that only specific gas providers and shippers could access specific amounts of information, and in utilising the business objects role security, we developed and built a kind of complex roles matrix that allowed the identified users only to see their necessary data. Additionally, I guess the service that we provide is as a user pay service. So this means that when you log into the system, you're charged, I guess, in your usage, the amount of times you log in, how many user accounts you've got, the data access you use, and the amount of data you download. So using the audit functionality within Business Objects and tying this back into the role security, we managed to be able to track and control the amount of users and their usage, and then build a kind of complex report that would develop and derive the charging mechanisms that then directly interface into our kind of invoicing system, and then we managed to pass that back out to the shippers in the gas industry, and therefore kind of providing kind of transparency, I guess, in terms of the pricing and the charges that we were being asked to pay, and also then, I guess, internally driving a lot more process and efficiency in terms of making sure that whole process was automated. Also, I guess, in terms of again, utilising the kind of SDK, software development kit, and the kind of Java interface or GUI, we had to design a very user-friendly interface that wrapped around the kind of application and therefore made it as intuitive and easy to use in the external marketplace. Okay. So just maybe a little bit around TCS and its relationship with SAP. At the moment, TCS, is north of 250,000 employees worldwide, and then clearly within that, our kind of SAP offerings and solution services play a key part within that. We've offer a kind of multitude, I guess, of services, whether it be implementation of very specific and niche products in terms of, for example, business objects, but also then the wider scale and arena in terms of ERP, global implementations, and SAP HANA, and so on and so forth. We're heavily involved in that. So across the globe, we've got a number of competency centers set up in terms of Center of Excellences, and they're set up across America, Europe, and India, where we've kind of got an active consultancy size of around 7,500 people that are actively involved in SAP engagements across the globe. And I think concurrently at the moment, we've got about 200, 250 active SAP assignments. And then I guess specifically within the analytics area, we've got north of about 1,000 employees that are involved directly in delivering analytics solutions. So really guessing just a little bit about the outcome and the challenge. I guess the key challenge from a TCS delivery perspective was this solution had to be put in place within 24 weeks, which is pretty aggressive. So how did we achieve that? One of the things was adopting a kind of agile methodology in terms of the delivery of the solution, which I think from an Xoserve perspective was a kind of a change in the traditional approach that they used to deliver projects, but always going down the classical software development lifecycle process. So there was a clear kind of change management piece that we had to wrap around the delivery of this project to make sure that agile development approach was comprehensively understood within Xoserve and delivered. Then I guess being able to utilize our kind of offshore development teams, we managed to make a quick turnaround in terms of the artifacts, etc., in terms of driving through the workshops that were needed for the delivery. And I guess the last thing and most important, I guess, in terms of maybe from a delivery perspective, was the timelines and how we tried to reduce those timelines significantly. So again, by kind of maximizing the user interface and its simplicity, that actually allowed us to roll out to 20,000 users without actually any training required. So not only significantly changed or reduced the timescales for the delivery of the project, but also actually dramatically reduced the cost base within the gas industry within the UK in terms of not having to train 20,000 people to use a system. Okay. So I think I'll just pass you back over to Dave, and he can talk a little bit more about the results and the outcome in the gas industry. Thanks.
Yeah, so just to finish off there, I mean, Andrew talked about the speed of delivery, which as customers in Xoserve, obviously we're very pleased with. I mentioned previously the driver to drive down our help desk calls with the delivery of the new service, and we actually saw a 20% reduction in call volumes immediately afterwards. And a consequent significant cost reduction. And in terms of the service Xoserve provides to its customers, I've included on the slide there just 3 quotes from 3 of the shipper and supplier organisations. I won't read them out, but we're very happy with that as feedback from our customer base. So I think that wraps up this session today. Andrew and I will be going to the, I don't know whether it's called the Analytics Theatre, next door, if anybody wants to come and talk about this presentation further or ask any questions. We'd be happy to see you there. Thank you.